Throughout the New Orleans region, nonprofit organizations offer a broad array of services to the community while also providing jobs for many. But the COVID-19 pandemic has caused disruptions in their operations and much-needed fundraising efforts. So just how are area nonprofits coping with these challenges? Coming up for discussion now with local nonprofit leaders on Living in the New Normal, Challenges for Nonprofits. Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh, and thanks for joining us for the latest in our continuing series, Living in the New Normal, which is exploring the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our lives. Work and school, play, all have been affected. So have nonprofit organizations, which provide assistance to the community in just so many ways. Here to discuss how nonprofits are doing these days, Kellie Chavez, Greene, Director of Nonprofit Leadership and Effectiveness with the Greater New Orleans Foundation. University of New Orleans Professor Steven Mumford, who, with the Greater New Orleans Foundation, conducted a study on the impact of the pandemic on nonprofits in Southeast Louisiana. And University of Pittsburgh School of Law Professor Philip Hackney, whose expertise is in nonprofits and tax law. Professor Hackney is a Louisiana native, formerly taught at the LSU Law Center, and has assisted nonprofits in the state. Welcome to you all. And first, I'm going to go over to Kellie just for a brief explanation. The Greater New Orleans Foundation, what is it and what do you guys do?
Yeah, thanks, Marcia, and thanks for hosting this conversation. Well, the Greater New Orleans Foundation is the community foundation for Southeast Louisiana, and we serve a 13-parish region that, again, encompasses Southeast Louisiana, and we work with both donors and nonprofits. So we help donors meet their charitable goals by setting up a fund at the foundation, and we work with nonprofits through grant making and other programs.
All righty. Steve, I'm going to go over to you because in the study that you conducted, which we'll talk a little bit more in a little bit, but first, when we talk about nonprofits in Southeast Louisiana, how many are there?
Well, it's a large sector. It's a diverse sector. It really is our social safety net outside of government and working as a partner with government to support our region through disasters and in good times. And just looking at some of the recent IRS data, which is probably the best most accurate list we have of nonprofits in the region. We're looking at as many as 6,000 just in our region alone of all types of nonprofits, and then looking more closely at 501c3 charities, which we tend to think of as nonprofit organizations providing services to the public. There are probably over 5,000. So there's a great number, but of course a huge diversity and variety in the types.
And the types of services that they offer, both social services, arts and culture. I mean, like you said, just a vast array. What kind of money into our economy is generated through nonprofits?
A great deal as well. So and then again, this is based on a few years ago, and it's only growing and growing since. But we're talking about over $18 billion in assets held by our nonprofit organizations. Think about large hospitals, universities, schools. These are all types of nonprofits. And $13 billion in annual revenues. So a great deal of importance to our local economy. In fact, the data suggests that as much as 12% of our workforce in the New Orleans metro area is employed by nonprofit organizations.
You know, and this is something, and in the study that you conducted, there was a reference in the conclusion to the fact that this is really sort of a mysterious sector where people really aren't aware of all that's done by nonprofits.
It's one of those things where we all interact with nonprofit organizations every day. We certainly are right now. And so although people touch nonprofits in every aspect of their lives, they may not recognize them as distinct entities.
All right. Philip, let's go on over to you because you are a tax law professor and expert with a fine expertise actually in nonprofits. You've worked a lot with nonprofits while you were here in Louisiana. You were very active with those, and certainly you informed on the national scale. What exactly is a nonprofit as opposed to a for-profit, and how does an organization become a nonprofit?
Absolutely. Great question. So nonprofits are organizations that don't have shareholders. There aren't people who own it. We all own it as a community, right? These are organizations formed as nonprofit corporations. Typically in Louisiana, you'd form it under the Louisiana Nonprofit Code. And it allows people to form an organization to carry out a particular mission. So these are organizations that are mission-oriented rather than profit-oriented. In order to form them, you form the corporation, and you have a board of directors, and that board of directors controls that organization to carry out its mission. Typically a charitable organization, which is probably the most common nonprofit that most people know, will also file a Form 1023 with the IRS in order to get recognized as tax exempt so that they can get access to the charitable contribution deduction, ability sometime to issue bonds, to get extra benefits and property tax exemptions. A lot of different things that we do as government to support nonprofits.
So that's a key 2 words there, tax exemption. That's a big thing for nonprofits.
Absolutely. It's critical. And in order to maintain that status, you have to operate within your mission and operate with certain rules, right? You can't allow people to be making money out of this organization. It has to be furthering a particular purpose that is considered charitable. So this can include healthcare and educational, religious activities, a lot of social services, food banks and so on, universities. A lot of different things. As you were saying, it is a kind of a mysterious sector there in a way.
And also, they need to support themselves. And because they are a nonprofit, they have to do it in a certain way.
Absolutely. So it's an interesting thing, right? A lot of them will fundraise. So LPB needs money, right? We regularly have fundraising drives.
And so does WYS. Which I say, yes.
Sorry, no, I'm from Baton Rouge. My apologies.
That's okay. It's okay.
WYES
All one in the same,
well.
really. All one in the same.
But yeah, so they will fundraise. They also get lots of money from the state and local governments. They'll partner with the state and local governments to carry out all sorts of services, education and healthcare, social services. And they also do fee-for-service. Biggest part is probably fee-for-service. Think arts organizations. Universities as well, right? They're selling services to people that are looking for education.
And so to be that nonprofit, though, you do have to keep reporting to IRS what you're doing.
Yes, there is an annual Form 990 tax return, just like you have to file your 1040 on an annual basis. A nonprofit has to file what's known as an information return. And this is a document that, one, allows the IRS to know that you're operating consistent with your mission, and two, allows the public to see what it is you're doing. What kind of money you're bringing in, what kind of activities you're doing, and ensuring that you're complying with what you're supposed to do to get all those tax benefits.
Right. Okay. Kellie, back over to you. You know, the pandemic, we know, it's affected all of us, and it's certainly impacted nonprofits. So you, along with Steve over at the University of New Orleans, conducted a study to see what that impact has been.
Yeah, we sure did. So we had planned to conduct a comprehensive study of the nonprofit sector prior to the pandemic. We actually issued the study a couple of days before the governor on March 13th ordered all schools closed. And so we pivoted and recast the study as a COVID-19 nonprofit impact study and had great participation. Over 300 nonprofits participated in the study, getting us some real good data.
And so, Steve, who were the respondents, basically, in what areas, and how did you sort of, do a deep dive on the types of respondents who did answer?
Yeah, so we drew our respondent list, our sampling frame from those IRS records to try to get as many nonprofits included as possible, but they really run the gamut. Many of them were human services organizations providing all sorts of direct services to people in need. Think of food banks, for example, as well as a lot of arts and cultures organizations. Those are very prevalent, particularly in our region with our rich culture here. But as well as supportive organizations for youth, in education, for health. We did exclude some of the largest nonprofits, like those universities and hospitals that may have skewed the sample. But otherwise, we had a really broad representative sample in terms of budget sizes, in terms of geographic region across our 13 parishes in the region, and in the types of missions that they pursue.
Kellie? Just sort of generally, how are nonprofits faring during this time?
Well, just like every part of our society, feeling a little upside down. I mean, our nonprofit sector is resilient, and the leaders that lead them are really making every effort to sustain themselves. But as we were sharing about the business model of nonprofits and how they raise revenues, they're very dependent on fundraisers, for examples. And in our study, over 31% of nonprofits had to cancel fundraisers. If you remember, the pandemic happened in the spring. That's fundraising season. Well, they had to cancel them again in the fall. And now we're looking towards spring 2021. And you're already seeing that nonprofits are canceling their fundraising. So revenue constraints has been a problem for our nonprofits, coupled with the tension of having an increase in demand for their services.
Right.
1 in 7 nonprofits reported an increased demand for their services. So they're trying to meet this need with less resources, which is a challenge.
Yeah, a really big challenge. And, we wanted to get a firsthand look at some of these challenges facing the nonprofits in the area. So we recently visited the 7-acre Grodat Youth Farm in City Park, which teaches young people to respect the land, its bounty, and each other.
Grodat Youth Farm is an urban farm in New Orleans. We are a site where young leaders grow and develop into New Orleans' next generation of leaders. So over the course of a growing season, we support young leaders through learning and growth and development in the areas of sustainable agriculture, community leadership, and food justice and food systems. So young people come to our farm, about 70 young people come every year to learn in those 3 areas, practice leadership, peer development, and get their hands dirty in the soil. We grow such a vast array of foodstuffs. We are known most for our tomatoes and for our mixed greens. One thing that we really pride ourselves on as we talk about how we work with the land, sustainable agriculture is extremely important. We want to make sure that the food that we grow for people is, one, healthy in that it is not produced with chemicals or pesticides, and we use everything organically, but that we also respect the land that we are on.
I think that's something I've definitely learned a lot about is the importance of sustainable agriculture on the health of humans as well as the health of the environment, and just how being sustainable does affect the environment in a positive way.
I think it's very important to have this kind of like community service because not a lot of people have access to fresh produce and fresh vegetables, fruits, and things like that, and not everybody has access to people who are so loving and caring.
So we want people to understand the history of the land that we work on. That history comes with understanding the indigenous peoples who were here before us, the enslaved peoples who were here before us, the fact that this was a golf course before, we made our name here. We grow about 37,000 pounds of food each year. It goes straight to somebody's table, as it should. And we also rely heavily on public support. Grodat specifically, over half of our income comes from grants and foundations. About another quarter of our revenue comes from individual donations, and another quarter of our revenue comes from earned income sources like the sales of our farm produce and also the farm dinners that we hosted, primarily pre-COVID. We were hit hard. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So we had to cancel our farm dinners. We had to cancel our annual fundraiser. We had to cancel our in-person programming and shift immediately to a model that would support young people at home. Thankfully, we did not have to close our doors. We were essential workers and that we were food producers. So we had to make sure that our acres were still being tended and cultivated, because if our acres, went fallow, then people weren't fed. The pandemic really exposed a number of the gaps and really made the gaps worse. So it's unfortunate that in New Orleans, food insecurity rates were already high. Now, 1 in 3 people, 1 in 4 people are going without food. And we're known for our food, right? Everything that we do in this city, everything that we do in this state is connected to a meal. To have people who are going without is just unconscionable. We are in it for the long haul. We hope to break our harvest records this year. We realize that the stakes are high and that the food insecurity gaps are widening. The food access gaps are widening. They're compounding, and we are here to help fill those gaps as much as we possibly can.
Grow That Youth Forum certainly serving a multitude, really, of people in the community, the youth that go there to learn, and then also the people who benefit from the food. And as we heard Devin say, this is the time when people really do need assistance, food assistance. So, what are you finding, Kellie? What are the biggest challenges that nonprofits are facing right now?
I think it goes back to what is their business model and their revenue streams and how can they sustain their work. And I will say our sector is being innovative on how they do that, but they're also really beginning to think about how they can work better together and to create some efficiencies and economies of scale through strategic partnering or restructuring, just again, looking at their operations and seeing how they might do business differently, both to increase impact, but also their sustainability.
And we know those galas that organizations have, or fundraisers like the farm dinner for GrowDat. All of that just came to an end, and so nonprofits are having to be creative. Certainly, we are here at WYES. I mean, we're a nonprofit, and we've felt this impact. So, what are you finding that groups are doing out there?
Well, like I said, they are exploring how they can move their fundraisers online, but also, the point was made. Nonprofits raise a lot of their revenue from programs and services, fees, ticket sales, as if you imagine arts organizations. So again, how do they bring that programming to community with the constraints that we have with COVID? So it's a lot about virtual programming, really learning how to pivot, and again, connecting with their most loyal donors, those foundations, those individuals that have been supporting them over time, and re-engaging with those donors to determine how they might support them through this crisis, but also beyond the crisis.
Steve, are we finding that the nonprofits are having to cut back on their services, on their staff?
There is certainly some of that. Luckily, the Paycheck Protection Program through the Federal CARES Act was a huge lifesaver for our sector, like so many other parts of our economy. But that was just a short-term stopgap. I mean, it just got us through the summer, and now we're seeing all those financial and fiscal issues re-arising as we wait for hopefully more federal stimulus.
And so that did help keep some staff members on, I know. But through the study that you did, were you finding out from some of these nonprofits that they were actually having to let people go or furlough people?
Absolutely. There were absolutely layoffs, but more so, I think there were a lot of cancellation of short-term worker contracts, like in the arts sector, where maybe they could not renew contracts or bring back musicians, for example, for festivals. So a lot of that doesn't really get captured in the national data. There's a lot more hurt going around than I think we recognize.
And, Steve mentions the national data, Phil, so let's move it on back over to you, because you do have a national perspective. Is this something that is kind of unique to our area, or is this something you're seeing playing out across the country?
No, this is a unique situation. I mean, I've seen disaster before in Louisiana and dealt with it quite a bit with the nonprofit community, and there are ways of dealing with that. But this is national. Nonprofits are suffering everywhere, particularly those fee-for-services places. I think Steve's right that the arts sector is particularly getting hurt with contract workers, and it's happening everywhere. You're seeing there's about 4,000 nonprofits recently have been lobbying Congress to get additional work on things like Paycheck Protection Program, more unemployment insurance. That stuff is really needed to keep that vibrant sector and to make sure that people are fed and housed in ways that we're just not able to do right now because of the shutdown.
Nonprofits, just to exist every day without the pandemic, it is a challenge. It's a challenge to secure those funds, to find a resource for those funds, to get those funds. So this pandemic, I mean, are you hearing that this is really making it too challenging for a lot of nonprofits out there, Phil?
It has been, yes. I think we're going to see, I think Ohio just put out a new stat, and they're expecting about 7% of nonprofits to close. A lot of nonprofits are beginning to discuss whether they can merge with other nonprofits. So that partnering is a big part of the strategies. But yes, they're really suffering right now. And I think we're going to see some move out. Some have gotten lean. The arts organizations I know have, they've shed jobs and they've gotten lean to try and make it through these times, but it's hard.
So, Steve, I'm going to go back to you. In the study, what are they doing? What are nonprofits? What advice would you have for nonprofits? And you too, Kellie. Let's start with Steve right now. At this time, to stay viable, what advice do you have for them?
Well, it's a really amazing thing, as Kellie described. At the same time as these nonprofits are losing some of their most stable funding sources, the demand for their services is just rising exponentially. So they're having to basically do more with less. But these nonprofits are so scrappy. I mean, in our region, many of them have survived through hurricanes and other disasters, and they know how to adapt and be resilient. So sometimes they're shifting the types of strategies they use to advance their mission and serve their target populations, but they're still finding ways to do more with less, essentially.
Kellie, you mentioned collaborations. So what does that mean exactly? Where are nonprofits sort of have the same mission? Perhaps they could come together? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think sometimes even how we can partner is a mystery, because there is a large continuum of the ways that you can partner. Everything from a merger, but also shared services, consolidated back office, joint programming. And so actually at the Greater New Orleans Foundation, we're about to launch a webinar series to help organizations understand how they can partner and really maintain the integrity of their missions, but create greater impact, more sustainability from just working better together. And I think it starts with just understanding all the ways that you can partner. And collaboration is a value of the nonprofit sector. It always has been, but it does take some resources and some expertise to sort of navigate that. So that's an area where we think that we can help.
A disaster plan, that is something that is really noted in the study that you guys did. Have you found that most groups don't have one?
Yeah, we were really surprised by that. Again, this study happened in March, and at the time, I think it was just about 20% reported having a continuity of operations plan. And this is in Southeast Louisiana, and this year we went through a pandemic and a couple, half dozen storms. And so again, really encouraging nonprofits as they reflect on this pandemic, plan for these emergencies, whether it's a hurricane or a disaster, through a continuity of operations plan. That's good just to have in place in general, but also think about how you might build a reserve. In our study, less than, I think it was 34% of nonprofits reported having a reserve fund, which is a safety net, kind of a little extra side of cash that you can use in an emergency. And our nonprofits are so vulnerable without that fund. So that's another recommendation we're having for nonprofits, when they can, to start thinking about building that reserve fund.
And then, of course, new funding sources. Phil, we talked about how it is challenging just in everyday times for a nonprofit to get that money. But do you have any advice on how to perhaps find new funding sources?
Yeah, one of the things I think needs to be happening, and it has happened to a certain degree, is there are a number of charities out there that are referred to as private foundations that have large endowments that can support funds. I'd hope to see those private foundations start opening up their pocketbook more, just making a larger payout. So I think we have to start thinking about whether there are private foundation resources available. Use whatever federal resources are available. So, where you have an employee that can get unemployment, you think about that, whether that's something that can work for the moment. The lobbying that's going on by the nonprofit sector to seek funds from the federal government, I think is a big part. One other thing, this year, a $300 charitable contribution is immediately written off, so I encourage your viewers to consider making a donation this year up to $300. You'll be able to write it off, no doubt. So I really encourage people to go out and contribute. They need the money if you have those resources now.
Good lead into the next segment, too, because I was going to ask you guys, what can the community do? And I know the Greater New Orleans Foundation has some specific programs to help in the organizational efforts of nonprofits. You want to just quickly describe those, Kellie?
Yeah, sure. I would encourage nonprofits to look to their community foundations. We have them on every parts of our state to look what grant opportunities might be available. And I will say a lot of grant makers are shifting their priorities, so there might might be new opportunities that weren't there prior to the pandemic, but also really use this time to sort of sharpen your axe and build your toolbox. We offer a lot of different educational opportunities at the foundation, including the strategic partnering webinar I mentioned, but also about how you can shore up your governance, the board of directors, your fundraising as well. So look at opportunities again to just learn and figure out how you can adapt to this changing environment.
And Steven, you're talking to these various nonprofits, through this study. What's the message that you're getting from them?
I think they just want to be recognized, that they are stepping up to the plate in the times of a crisis, and they're doing everything possible to serve their community, to serve their mission. And I think there's a lot of burnout in the sector. People are just overextending themselves. They're working so hard. They're not necessarily, nonprofits aren't necessarily laying off people, but just getting more out of the staff and the resources that they already have, or the volunteers. So I think they just need our support and our recognition and a little bit of grace.
And so for those who want to give, what advice would you have for those, for, organizations and for philanthropy?
I would just have to say intermediaries like the Greater New Orleans Foundation are a great place to start if you want to give but you're not as familiar with the sector or specific organizations that you're passionate about. That's an excellent entry point into contributing to the sector.
And also, of course, there's Give NOLA Day, which is a specific day. Why don't you explain that a little bit, Kellie?
Yeah, so Give NOLA Day is the first Tuesday in May. I actually got an invite from our communications staff today to mark my calendar. And so this is an online giving day where folks have the opportunity to support their nonprofits, $10 or more, and we will leverage those donations through matching dollars. So again, Give NOLA Day coming up in 2021 is a great opportunity, but you don't have to wait for Give NOLA Day. Many organizations are doing end-of-year campaigns now. And again, if you're not connected to a nonprofit but have a passion for a certain cause, explore the web and visit these folks' websites. And many nonprofits are taking online donations.
Okay, real quick, 10 seconds, final thoughts. Philip?
Breathe. Going to be okay. Take it into consideration, what's going on to your organization. Stick to your mission.
Steve?
I just want to touch on an issue we didn't discuss, which is the diversity and specifically racial and gender diversity of our sector. So I would say this is, a time to maybe look inward as an organization and try to rebuild with a stronger, more inclusive, more equitable structure.
Excellent advice. Kellie?
Yeah, and I would say stay tuned. We are partnering with UNO to launch a study again this January to compare to see where nonprofits are now, and also to do some work about understanding who's leading our nonprofits at the gender and racial level. So again, more data that we can chew on about our wonderful sector.
And we'll be looking for that. Thanks a lot for joining, guys. Really do appreciate you being here for this important discussion. Of course, nonprofits need community support year-round, but during the season of giving, it is especially appreciated. So thanks for watching, and coming up in our first Living in the New Normal in year 2021, so long 2020, we will look into how the COVID vaccine will be distributed in our area and how, when, and where we can get it. So until the next time, stay well. Good evening.